nobody knows. That's the problem. It's probably a genetics plus maybe in utero changes. We just don't know. And so Kennedy is wrong about that. He's wrong about cell phones. He says, oh, if you hold this phone up here, you get cancer in your brain over here. No, this is not true. That has never been. We've looked into this. The radiation coming from a phone, the energy coming out of the phone, is so weak. It doesn't even penetrate the skull, much less get into the brain. It's not possible to even if you held it right next to the brain, the energy coming from it isn't enough to break the chemical bonds that would trigger a mutation in a cell that would then become cancerous. It can't happen, much less 5G. But we heard this with 4G. We heard this with 3G. This is going to cause all kinds of immune system breakdown. No, it never happens. The energy dissipates with the square of the distance. So if you're twice as far, you're 100 feet away. Now you're 200 feet away. The energy is 4 times lower, not 2 times lower, but 4 times lower than it was. And so it's virtually indetectable. I mean, you wouldn't even know you're near a cell phone tower. People claim that they can detect it, but they can't.
Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's such a pleasure today to be here with Michael Shermer, who actually is one of my favorite people that I had no idea lived in Santa Barbara, but somebody who I followed for a number of years because of Skeptic magazine. And I have subscribed on and off over the years or pick it up at the grocery store. And Michael is just this world-renowned science-based author, writer, and skeptic. So it's such a pleasure to be able to talk to you.
Thank you for saying that.
How are you doing today?
Oh, everything is great. I'm in Santa Barbara. How could it not be great?
Yes. Well,
we moved here in 2016, and I'm never going back.
Yes. This is a great place to live. The weather's always awesome. I wanted to talk to you, Michael. You have this incredible book, Conspiracy: Why the Rational Believe the Irrational, and it's just one of your latest where you basically kind of challenge a lot of what we're experiencing right now in our culture, which is this rise of conspiracy theory beliefs. And I wanted to just dive right in and talk to you because I recently did a podcast with a doomer, and he is a self-described doomer, and he basically says, he acknowledges that climate change is real and that humans have been destroying the planet through overuse of fossil fuels, but he goes a step farther and says, it's too late, it's over. And I wanted to talk to you because I know you've written about this subject, you've talked about this subject, and he calls it the big green lie. Elliot Jacobson, he lives in town, and he's got a big Twitter following, and it's just sort of interesting. It's a little bit of a controversial podcast, but you as somebody who follows climate change and you're very aware of what is happening, is it too late for humans to save the planet for humans, as he states, or what should we be doing from your scientific perspective?
Oh boy. Okay. Right. Well, first of all, global warming is real. It's human caused. It is an issue we should deal with. It's not the end of the world. It's not the apocalypse. It's not doomsday. You don't have to buy your shelter in Idaho and store up guns and gold and all that stuff. None of that's going to happen. One of the things that we've learned from past predictions of doom and gloom from different problems is that our species is really good at solving problems, and we do it. If you just look at the ozone hole, back in the 80s that was a big thing, and then by the 90s we had solved that problem by taking the CFCs out of aerosols and things like that. Now, climate change is a much bigger problem, but we can do it technologically. And the problem with doing it the way most environmentalists want to do it, which is to say cutting back on the use of fossil fuels, is not fair to the developing world. It's always the kind of, let's say, limousine liberals that want to do this. That is, we have our riches now, and so now you guys have to stop using fossil fuels, you guys being the poor people. And that's just not fair. The problem with air pollution and tuberculosis and other health issues in the developing world is that they're burning dirty fuels. Everything from, cow pies to wood and coal, and, the idea that they're going to have, nuclear power and sustainable solar panel arrays and things like that is just not realistic. You have to be wealthy to develop those technologies. So the best thing we could do is to develop the third world into the first world by making them rich. And also, people that are poor don't care about what the climate's going to be like a century from now. I mean, they're worried about where their next meal is going to come from, right? So it's a first world problem that we should deal with, but it's not going to be the end of the world, not even remotely close. And by the way, that's not the only threat. Of course, we've been talking about nuclear weapons for 50 years as an existential threat, but the latest one is AI. Artificial intelligence is going to end the world. Okay. The problem of being my age at 68 with the institutional memory, I've been doing Skeptic Magazine for 30 years, is we've heard this over and over and it never comes true. So it's like, you know what, maybe don't make gloom and doom predictions about the end of the world, because it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. One of the things I wanted to ask you also about was the big green lie, sort of this trade-off that they say is, as we develop solar energy, wind energy, as we try to reduce dependence on fossil fuels, we actually are creating another problem. We're creating these vast desert wastelands of wind energy, solar energy, and we're actually further contributing to climate change. One of his comments was, well, think about the mining that has to go into looking for the cobalt, or these things that we use for our electric batteries for our cars. Do you think about that at all in terms of the trade-offs, or is it, again, just a first world problem?
Well, okay, I always like to quote Thomas Sowell here. There are no solutions. There's just trade-offs. You want this, then you're going to have to give that. And, there's no utopia. It's just protopia. That is, we make tomorrow slightly better than today. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Every solution that we find, every problem we find a solution to is going to generate more problems. We got to find more solutions. The worst thing you want to do is go back. Let's go back to being hunter-gatherers, where the earth can sustain, a few million people. Well, that's not going to happen. And what are you going to do with the other 7.8 billion people? Just let them die? I mean, it's just such an anti-human, inhumane philosophy. No. All of these problems are soluble. It's like I like to say, we're never going to run out of oil. People hear this and go, what? How can you say that? It's a finite amount, and we're a globe. It's going to run out. No, supply and demand. Just think of it as an economic problem. As the supplies diminish, the price will go up astronomically, and then no one will buy the last barrel of oil. We will find solutions to this. We already are. Again, institutional memory. I remember, electric cars had been being developed my entire adult life, but they just never caught on. They've been around since the 1920s, actually. In the 1920s, there were more electric cars in New York City than there were fossil fuel burning cars. But for various reasons, the battery technology wasn't there, and the automobile industry, along with the oil industry, became so efficient that it was just super cheap to just go with the internal combustion engine. But Elon changed all that. So, okay, now it's cool. And, he's no longer, I drive a Tesla, but he's no longer the coolest car on the road. I've seen Mercedes and BMW electric cars that are just unbelievably great. It's like, well, I might have to go to one of these next, And that's capitalism. It's just competition. Everybody sees the writing on the wall. In a few decades, there won't be any more internal combustion engine cars. They're going to be all electric. Same thing with trucks and taxis and so on. So that'll be the end of that problem. Now, that's not solving the total global warming problem, because that's maybe only 6% of emissions. Really, we have to, back to, where does the electricity come from? When I plug in my Tesla, the electricity doesn't come from the electricity ferry out of the wall. Right. It's got to be generated somewhere. And most of that's, coal burning, electric power stations. So we got to have nuclear. I'm all in favor of renewables like solar and wind and geothermal and so on, but you got to add nuclear into the equation. And the problem with nuclear is that people freak out about it psychologically, and there's kind of a social taboo against it. Therefore, we've not allowed the industry to develop like all other industries, which are allowed to fail and develop and try stuff, experiment, let's try this and that, and you end up with the best system. There are alternative technologies for nuclear power stations, but it's so heavily regulated that they can't run the experiments and try 50 different kinds of technologies. And if we could take the brake off and let that happen, that's definitely the way to go. I mean, it's really, there are no emission standards. And people go, oh, what, 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and all this stuff. Well, first of all, nobody died in 3 Mile Island, not one person. Fukushima, almost all the deaths and problems were caused not by the nuclear power station, but by the tsunami and the waves, right? At Chernobyl, okay, this was a poorly designed, Soviet Cold War era, poorly, very impoverished, system and so on and so forth. That's never going to happen again. Even by the Russians, they're not going to do that again. So, and by the way, the 3 Mile Island incident happened 2 weeks after the film The China Syndrome came out with Jane Fonda. So people conflate this in their mind, decades later. Oh my God, wasn't that, 3 Mile Island, wasn't that this big meltdown? I saw a movie about that. It's like, no, you saw a drama. They made this, had nothing to do with they filmed it the year before. Anyway,
right.
So that's my solution is go forward, better technology. Let's get everybody rich. Let's make everybody's life better. Don't hold people back.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you about somebody who's been in the news lately. And, you're somebody you've been on a variety of podcasts, Joe Rogan, you have your own popular podcast. And so I want to kind of talk to you about somebody who, I don't know if you've met him or not, but Robert Kennedy Jr. is getting all this attention right now. He's going to run for president, and he's doing the talk show sort of circuit. And what's his big deal, right? What's his big controversial thing? He's talking about vaccines, okay? And so I watched him in a couple of these podcasts, and he says he's not anti-vaccine. However, he does think there's a link between vaccines and autism. And we know that this is a very controversial issue among some people, but there's Republicans, there's conservatives who really like this guy, even though he's a Democrat and, he's a Kennedy. And so he's resonating with them. People are concerned that he's going to disrupt everything for Joe Biden. But how is it we live in this age where this presidential candidate is out there saying that vaccines can cause autism? He's saying that cell phone radiation can lead to cancer. These are things you have written about and talked about as not being correct. So
yeah.
Can you talk about this? And
yeah,
why?
He's wrong about all that. I don't know Robert Kennedy. I've never met him. I've been on Rogan's podcast 7 times. I don't have any objections, like so many people do, to Joe talking to anybody he wants. Yeah. He's just doing his thing. And if you expect a 60 minutes kind of piece where you have a team of researchers that prep the host and they do this investigation for months at a time, and you see the 8-minute clip of the final version, that isn't what Joe does. He just sits down, he doesn't do very much prep, and he just talks to people. All right, so you just got to know that's what I'm getting. And you're going to have to do your own fact checking for the most part. Now, Joe did, to his credit, offer $100,000 to Robert Hotez to debate Kennedy on his show, and Hotez has been on Rogan's show before, so he knows him. He knows Joe's a stand-up guy. He's not going to cut him off, and it's not like you said Kennedy's working the talk shows. He's not doing any talk shows. They won't have him. He's doing podcasts.
Podcasts, yes. Yeah.
This is going to be the media platform for the 2024 election, I think. The 2016 and 2020 was Twitter and Instagram, I guess, for 2020. This one's going to be podcast. And it is a game changer because, like, for example, Kennedy, he works in 20 different areas, foreign policy, U.S. military policy, the history of the Cold War, this and that, not just the vaccine stuff. And you listen to the whole 3 hours, like, oh, this guy actually knows about a lot of different things. He's pretty sharp. Why is he so wrong about these other things on vaccines? I don't know. Everybody's got a thing. And it's really unfortunate because he has been told, you are wrong and here's why. We don't really need him to debate Hotez to find out where Kennedy is wrong. It's all over the internet. There are tons of videos, articles. We've published quite a bit, not targeting him directly. Yeah. He's just reflecting this long anti-vax thing that began back in the 90s with this single paper that was published in the Lancet that claimed there was a link between vaccines and autism. That paper was since has been withdrawn, declared to be fraudulent. It was, and there was conflicts of interest. The guy was paid by vaccine companies to find a certain outcome. no, by his own vaccine company he had invested in. Anyway, it just goes on and on. It's a terrible story. But the problem is we don't know the cause of autism. So where there's a vacuum of causal explanation, everybody and their brother with their alternative theories it just steps into the fray and says, I know what causes autism. So, and Kenny's not the only one. There's tons of other autism theories, and treatments for autism that have to do with diet and cleansing and all these kind of toxins that come from other, not just vaccines, but from other sources. So there's a dozen different theories that we've dealt with in Skeptic, and nobody knows. That's the problem. It's probably a genetics plus maybe in utero changes. We just don't know. And so Kennedy is wrong about that. He's wrong about cell phones. He says, oh, if you hold this phone up here, you get cancer in your brain over here. No, this is not true. That has never been. We've looked into this. The radiation coming from a phone, the energy coming out of the phone is so weak. It doesn't even penetrate the skull, much less get into the brain. It's not possible to even if you held it right next to the brain, the energy coming from it isn't enough to break the chemical bonds that would trigger a mutation in a cell that would then become cancerous. It can't happen, much less 5G. But we heard this with 4G. We heard this with 3G. This is going to cause all kinds of immune system breakdown. No, it never happens. The energy dissipates with the square of the distance. So if you're twice as far, you're 100 feet away. Now you're 200 feet away. The energy is 4 times lower, not 2 times lower, but 4 times lower than it was, and so it's virtually indetectable. I mean, you wouldn't even know you're near a cell phone tower. People claim that they can detect, but they can't. So these are all flaws. It's been pointed out to him over and over and over. So I'm disappointed because in other areas he seems like a rational, reasonable, smart guy. But I don't know. Some people have a thing in their head. It's like religion. If you're a Catholic, I'm not going to talk you out of being a Catholic. Because I'm an atheist. I have all these books on religion and so on. But that's it. You're a So it could be something like that for Kennedy. But to give him credit, he has some interesting ideas about foreign policy. Why do we have 800 to 900 military bases around the world? Yeah, that's a good question. What's going on with that? Why are we spending $1 trillion? Military industrial complex, he rants about that. But he points out, how come we've been in wars pretty much every year for the last 75 years since the end of World War II? Why is that? And, now other Republicans like Mike Pence, he's got his arguments. And that's another case for the podcast. Pence was on with Jordan Peterson for an hour and a half. And it's like, oh, wow, I thought that guy was a complete dolt. I'd never even heard him speak more than 30 seconds. And wow, he went on and he was pretty sharp. I'm like, okay, this is going to be an interesting campaign.
Yeah.
And in terms of how could somebody wild like Kennedy become a viable candidate, I just would have one word for you, Trump. How did this happen? This is American politics.
Yeah, that's a good example. Do you think Kennedy is doing this for political purposes because he knows that it will fire up a certain base that will vote for him? I have to think he knows better, right?
I don't know. Yeah. Do you mean he would take votes away from Biden and split the party and therefore the Republicans will win?
Well, I mean, on the autism thing, do you think that he deep down doesn't believe that, but knows that
I think he believes. I think he believes it. Yeah, for sure. And, in terms of vaccines, I think most people are not on board with going as far as he does. There's some questions about the COVID-19 vaccine. Does it really, it's going to prevent you getting infected? No, it was never intended to do that. I'm not sure how that whole story got started, but most people, get their kids vaccinated, for example. They just do because they know they should do that. You just have to see some of the newsreels from the 40s and 50s of polio. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, I'm getting my kid vaccinated, right. or the measles or mumps and rubella, all that. So I think most people don't go that far. Where Kennedy tags people's, I think, natural skepticism is about big pharma, big tobacco, big chemical industries. They do capture the regulatory state. They do bribe people. They do lie. We know this. So when he says, big tobacco lied about tobacco being addictive, they did for decades. The jury is still out. What jury? Where? There's no jury, and it's not out, right? And same thing with climate change. Although, interestingly, on Rogan, I noticed Kennedy's going on and on. You can't always trust the experts, and, there's no consensus on this. The jury is still out. We're not sure. We should just collect more data. We don't want to jump to any conclusions, and he's going on about vaccines that are, been tested for a century, and then Joe asked him about climate change. Oh, well, you got to trust the scientific consensus on this. Story's over. The jury's in. It's real and human caused, and it's going to be a big problem. It's like, wait a minute. I thought you just said don't trust the experts.
Right.
So you see, everybody has their thing, right?
A weird little odd belief. Yeah. Can I talk to you a little bit about the podcast versus the talk show and the mainstream media? Joe Rogan gets a bad reputation. Those podcasts get a bad reputation because, he's just putting questions out there and he's not challenging and he's just more being like a verbal learner and processor. And the traditional media says, oh, you're giving these people a platform. Why are you giving these people a platform? Because they're going to unfairly influence people who are watching. They're going to believe what you believe. And that's going to be harmful to us as a society, as a culture. And it should come through our traditional gatekeepers in the media because, they're trained journalists. Joe Rogan's not a journalist. Can you talk about that? Is there a downside to podcasts and people just being able to give people a platform and then all of a sudden anyone believes that and it's unchecked and unchallenged? Are there any benefits of having that traditional old school media kind of?
Well, sure. I mean, fact checking, editing, kind of have journalistic standards is important, and we still have that. That hasn't disappeared. I mean, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Washington Post, and so on, CNN, Fox News, ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, most of the stuff that gets reported there. If you take out the editorial pages in the newspapers, the stories are virtually identical. So I'm not worried about that. In terms of platforms, well, okay, Joe has the world's biggest platform now. Platforming Kennedy. He has a platform. He's running for president. Everybody knows who he's one of the most famous people in the world. Yeah. Where did this Kennedy? Joe gave this guy a platform, and now people know who he is. Of course, we all knew who Kennedy was, right? So it's not like he needed Joe. And he's already been on half a dozen podcasts since Joe, that also Barry Weiss, Jordan Peterson, and so on. He's got, millions of people have seen him. And so I don't really see any problem. I'm a kind of a free speech fundamentalist. I think just let people have their say. I mean, I'll talk to Holocaust deniers, creationists, anybody really, neo-Nazis. Why do you believe what you believe? What's your best argument? Give it to me. Mm-hmm. Now, one reason I think people don't want to debate Kennedy, or this Hotez guy doesn't, is because, and I've done this a lot with a lot of different, guns and climate and vaccines and creationism, Holocaust, I've done a lot of different debates. It's a lot of work because it's not enough to be an expert in your area. I saw this when I was younger, before I started debating. I would watch a professional evolutionary biologist debate a creationist. They think it's about evolutionary biology. It's not. It's creationism have their own set of arguments, their own strategies they use to knock holes in the mainstream theory. They go anomaly chasing. If you can't explain this one little thing right there, then I got you, and my theory is right? Or the 9/11 truthers. If you can't explain how this passport ended up here, down from one of the, then it was an inside job.
Building 7.
Building 7. Right. And I didn't know anything about why buildings fall. How come the World Trade Center buildings fell in their footprint? I thought, yeah, they should just go like that, right? No, they don't go like that. All you got to do is just talk to somebody that destroys buildings, demolishes buildings for a living, which I did. It's like, oh, I see. And, people hear these little memes and they, it fell almost at the speed of gravity and real time. It's like, but that is how it happens, and on and on. So the point is that if you're not prepared for each and every anomaly that the person brings up, then you could look bad. So Hotez knows his biology and science, epidemiology of vaccines for sure. But the fear is that if you just watch Kennedy for 3 hours on Rogan, he has got study after study. Well, Joe, there was this study done in 1976 published in this particular journal here that found that, so-and-so, the vaccines cause it. And Joe's like, oh, wow, I'd never heard of that. Jamie, look that up. And they Google it. And so if you're Hotez, you're sitting there, it's like, okay, what's the answer to that? If he doesn't know, then it's like, aha.
Yeah.
Right. So there is some risk to that.
It needs to be perfect. essentially.
Yeah, really. I mean, when I debated Graham Hancock on Rogan, almost 4 hours of, Göbekli Tepe and ancient civilizations and the Easter Island statues and the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx and, the water erosion on the back of the Sphinx. How come it looks like, I spent weeks preparing for that. Yeah. Just so I'd have most answers to. And I still came up with a few things that I didn't know, but that's part of the problem. And to Joe's credit, he gets hammered a lot, but he brought me on to do this. He's offered $100,000. This is the offer is now over $2 million.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. Other people have said, yeah, I'll put in 100,000. Right. And to me, it's astonishing that Hotez doesn't take this up. He could take $2 million and give it to the charity that makes those vaccines for poor people that he's always talking about. Why wouldn't you do that?
Right.
And it's like, I don't want a platform. He already has a platform. That's not the reason.
Right.
It's like you just don't want to do the work and look up every one of those studies. Well, why not? So that bothers me a little bit. Again, it's not a nobody. It's like, and even Joe had Robert Malone on talking about myocarditis as a result of vaccines. And I did wish he had somebody else on at the same time, but later he had other people on, and he's reasonably good about that. But again, he's doing something different than, say, the New York Times or CBS would do. And why would these guys go on that podcast? Because they get a platform for as much time as they want. Right. It's like, because I'm old enough to, my earliest books, I just made the rounds of the talk shows and did book tours city to city. You're on the morning show and the afternoon show and the evening show, and you get like 3-4 minutes. Right. It's just, you go on a podcast, you get 3-4 hours to talk about conspiracies. Let's get into it. And, Joe and I are going on about, what about the magic bullet and how did it do this? Let's look at the bullet. We went on and on for like an hour just about JFK. Right. And where else in the history of media could that ever be done?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of elitism when it comes to judging these podcasts. Like, oh, this person is not that, so they shouldn't even be asking those questions. But so many of us learn by just verbal processing. And Joe Rogan is a little bit, at times, kind of deer in the headlights, but other times he asks really good questions that everybody would be watching or will be wanting to ask. I wanted to ask you, though, like, for me, growing up, like, I love the idea of aliens, right, and UFOs, and, all these... I
have a whole bookcase of UFO books here.
Right, like the Roswell thing. I mean, the amount of time I spent, going through encyclopedias or reference books.
Here's Roswell, Dreamland, Area 51, Roswell. Oh yeah.
And trying to figure that out, like maybe it was real or not. And I think it's, wouldn't you say that kind of like every little kid, kind of maybe boys, we grow up with sort of this like idea, dream that there's something else. There's something else going on that we haven't been told. And whether it's UFOs or it's aliens or, if it's not a god, it's like, oh, there's another universe or something. Like, I think we all kind of have that as kids, and then we grow up and we learn, that's not real, that's not true. But did you have that when you were growing up? Were you
I was a big Star Trek fan. Uh-huh. The show began when I was in 6th grade, right? 1966, 6th grade, on my birthday, September 8th. And, it's just the Enterprise and they go in for strange new worlds. Oh, my God. Yeah, science fiction. I love science fiction. And so when I started college, I took a course in astronomy, just like, well, I don't know what to take. This looks good. I love Star Trek. And that was kind of my entry into science. And I think there is an impulse there that's deeper, that has to do with like almost a religious impulse. The idea that there's somebody out there that's way more powerful than us, and maybe they even know we're here. This is kind of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The idea that aliens are out there, they've come here, and if we did encounter them, the truth is, if we did encounter them, they would be vastly more superior to us. First of all, they wouldn't be behind us because they wouldn't get here. They wouldn't be able to build spaceships or whatever. And so the only way we'd encounter a civilization less developed than us is if we went to some planet and there they are, right? Mm-hmm. The prime directive in Star Trek, the primitive people, give them a laser gun, give them a phaser and see what they do, right? So, but how much more advanced would they be? It wouldn't be like 10 years or 100 years because evolution doesn't happen in some parallel way on different planets. you know, it would just be randomly 100,000 years ahead of us or a million years ahead of us. And if you just extrapolate, like Moore's law, the doubling of computing power every 1 to 2 years for the last 50 years, just take that out 50,000 years. Whoa. You know, what would the technological advancements be? They'd be astonishing. It'd be like holding a cell phone to a Neanderthal going, here, how about that? And they'd be like, whoa, you guys are gods, right? Yeah. And so I think if we did encounter aliens, they would be godlike. So I do think the search and the impulse to think that we're being visited or they're out there somewhere is like religion in a good way. You know, that's what religion is all about. Most religions have a Godhead, you know, and a theme, underlying theme that we're not alone. Because it's a little existentially frightening to think, you know, this is it. It's just us. Well, it could be. So, you know, we should do the right thing, take care of our planet, take care of each other, just in case, and not count on somebody to come rescue us. But we should search because, you know. So to the ufologists, you know, I'm open-minded, but, you know, I also understand how evidence works. You can't just make claims like we've been visited. Like the recent round, you know, of this guy, David Grush, who said, I talked to people who saw the machine, touched the machine, knows that, you know, we've been visited. All right, who are these people? Can't tell you. Can't tell us. Okay. And then I had another guest, Michael Schellenberger, who is a journalist who looked up, and so he talked to some other people, not the same people, but other people that said similar things to the people that talked to David Grush. And I thought, okay, well, I have Michael on my podcast. Who are these people? Can't tell you. Can't tell. Marco Rubio, you know, hey, I talked to these people too. Who are they? Can't tell you. It's like, come on. Enough stories about people who know people who said they saw. Can we at some point say, there it is. Here it is. Everybody, you look at it, take a picture of it, we dissect it, back engineer it. You know, here it is. Like the Chinese spy balloon. Right. You know, when that story first broke, it's like, China, come on, really? Let's take a look at it. You know, and the first pictures were a little grainy. It's like, maybe. You know, and then the next day, some sharper pictures. The next day, the jet goes up there and flies right above it and takes pictures and video. It's like, oh, okay, this thing is real, for sure, 100%. Yeah. And there you'll notice nobody asked about or talked about the credentials of the pilot and how decorated he is and how trustworthy a person he is. Who cares? There's the video. There's the pictures. And then you shoot it down. There's the debris. Right. That's what it would take for me to say aliens have visited here. The equivalent of the Chinese spy balloon.
Right. Well, they have a new name for it. What is unidentified aerial objects? And we've now
phenomena, UAP. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have these military people who are saying, I've seen it, right? And I saw it and it went this way and it was super fast. And I know you talked about this, and it's always this like grainy little light or footage going across. We seem to have a little bit more acceptance as a society that there could be something out there, whereas maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if you say you believe in UFOs, you're like a weirdo. Yeah. What do you think of these unidentified aerial phenomenon?
Most of them are artifacts of the camera, the video. They're grainy, blurry, grainy videos, blurry photographs. You know, everybody has one of these smartphones in their pocket, a high-resolution camera. Come on, where are these? You know, there should be thousands of really clear, sharp, unmistakable photos and videos of these things. Where are these? And, you know, these pilots say, hey, we see these things all the time. All the time? Well, how about get a high-resolution photograph next time? Now, there are some going around online this last week, but they're fake. They're CGI, really fake. But, you know, amusing. You know, that's going to be part of the problem with ChatGPT and the whole GPT-4 and the ability to generate, you know, artificial videos and photographs. That's going to make my job even harder.
Trying to debunk that. So take me back to you as, you know, a kid growing up. Obviously, you probably weren't born a skeptic, right? You used to Star Trek, but you, at some point, decided you were going to, you know, go this route. You're an atheist. Most people believe in some kind of God. You know, you say you're an atheist, people immediately judge you like, oh, you know, you're one of those. Was there ever a time when you were not a skeptic, when you were somebody who was maybe religious or somebody who believed that, oh, you know, maybe Maybe the aliens did build the pyramids, kind of thing.
Yes, I did. First of all, I was a born-again evangelical Christian for 7 years. I went to Pepperdine University, Church of Christ School. And I was going to study theology. I wanted to be a college professor and be a theologian and all that stuff. Anyway, long story short, I ended up not doing that, got into science, and that eventually led to my leaving my religion. But I wasn't raised religious. My parents weren't religious. It was just something I took up with under peer influence in the 70s. So I understand the religious mindset. I understand all the evangelical arguments for God's existence and not, whether Jesus was really resurrected or not. I know all those arguments. And, and then when I was in graduate school, I was also interested in the paranormal and the supernatural and, ESP and psychic stuff and hypnosis, altered states of consciousness, the soul and all this stuff. And it was a pretty hot topic. Uri Geller was bending spoons and, all the New Age movement was huge in the 70s and 80s. And I liked it. I was into it. But then because I got training in science. It's like, yeah, but how do you know it's actually true? I mean, really true, not just this is fun and entertaining. But is it really true? And, when you really look at the evidence for these claims, the evidence is pretty wanting. It's just terrible. Not the kind of evidence that anybody would accept if it was some scientific theory. So that led me to be skeptical simply because most ideas, even in science, are wrong. They're incorrect. Scientists themselves are always spitballing ideas, and most of them are wrong. So being a skeptic is not, it's not just an automatic denial of all knowledge. I believe lots of things. It's that the apportioning your belief and confidence based on the evidence. So more evidence, more confidence; less evidence, less confidence. And as we say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if it's a really extraordinary claim, like we have been visited by extraterrestrials, you hear this all the time. It's like, hang on, this would be one of the greatest discoveries ever. Not just the history of science, but the history of all of humanity. We are not alone. All right, what do you got? Show it to me, because this is spectacular. Well, I got this great video, and if you kind of use your imagination, you can sort of see it. Looks like this. Like, no, sorry, I'm going to do it. We need real evidence.
You mentioned you were evangelical Christian. Were you saved? Like, did you have?
Oh yes, I did the whole.
Did you feel anything?
I did. Oh yeah.
What did it feel like?
It felt like like the Holy Spirit was moving inside me.
Like a warmth or an energy.
Yes, yeah, kind of like that. Yeah. Well, just sort of a positive feeling. Yeah, but it wasn't like a Pentecostal thing where you're writhing on the ground and stuff and talking in tongues. Nothing like that. But I had gone to a Presbyterian church, which is a little more conservative than the Pentecostals, right? It was a much more intellectual process for me. But I was interested in all these topics that theologians deal with: free will and determinism, the problem of evil, is there existence for God's existence, arguments, and so on. And I went at Pepperdine, took classes in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the life of Jesus, the writings of C.S. Lewis. I read everything C.S. Lewis wrote. And so I was interested in this subject. It is an interesting subject.
So when you had that energy, that feeling in you, like when you're looking back now, what was that then? Oh,
just psychology of expectation, power of expectation. We know this from lots of different things. In the same way that some atheist secularist, like social justice activist or a Marxist terrorist or whatever, are totally emotionally engaged in moralizing about this cause that they have. It's just like a religion.
Right. So it's sort of.
I mean, you see these Antifa people out, burning things down. They're totally emotionally engaged. That's not religion exactly, but it's the same kind of internal psychological mechanisms at work.
Right. Are there any conspiracy theories that you do kind of believe, or you still are unsure? I mean, I saw, Oswald killed Kennedy, right? That happened, and 9/11 is exactly what they explained.
Well, 9/11 was a conspiracy. I don't know why people stumble on this. 19 guys plotting to fly planes into buildings without telling us ahead of time. That is a conspiracy. Yeah. They pulled it off. Right? The Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor. That was a conspiracy. Right? Hitler going against Stalin, breaking the treaties they had and invading Russia. That was a conspiracy. And Stalin was very paranoid, but he missed that one. So the point of my book is that it's what I call constructive conspiracism. Enough conspiracy theories turn out to be true that it pays to believe more are true than actually are, just in case, as opposed to the other kind of error where you miss real conspiracies You should have seen that one coming. So better to err on the side of caution. That's my argument. So, the FBI, the CIA, they have conspired to do all sorts of things. Government agencies over the last 50 years have lied to us. They've done secret things that Congress didn't know about, never approved, that were unconstitutional, illegal. I mean, the FBI had a program called the COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program, in which they spied on U.S. citizens, including Martin Luther King Jr. They taped his shenanigans with women in hotel rooms. They taped his sex and blackmailed him. Our government did that. And you know who signed off on that? Not just J. Edgar Hoover, but Robert Kennedy himself signed off on the wiretapping and secretly recording of Martin Luther King. Now, today, everybody's like, Dr. King is like a statue. He's like a god. And Robert F. Kennedy, oh my God, he's, this great man. When you're assassinated, you're automatically elevated to some other status, I guess. But, that's unbelievable. That's illegal. The Pentagon Papers revealed to what extent all the administrations were lying to the American public. Afghanistan papers showed how much, Rumsfeld and Bush and were lying about how it was going in Afghanistan. They just do this. I think you get into power and people just change. I'm just going to lie to everybody. Now I'm going to conspire to do stuff. Not just government agencies, corporations. I mentioned big pharma and, big tobacco. They lie. Opioids are not addictive. They knew they were addictive. We have the paper trail. They knew. They just didn't care. Right. Those are conspiracies. So they absolutely happen all the time. Writing the book, I thought, God darn, really? Right. I keep reading. Really, our own government assassinated this foreign leader? We were in on that? What? And these South American dictatorships. You got the communist dictator and the fascist dictator, right? We back the fascist dictators because at least they'll be friendlier to American business interests in those countries. Whereas the communists, if they win, they're just going to nationalize and take the company. So the CIA's down there rigging these elections, backing, the one leader over the other. We're not supposed to do that. Yeah. Congress didn't approve this. So there's a lot.
Do you think the Trump, the 2020 election, that there was any irregularities with the voting?
That's been examined, including by people who would want to find that, like Attorney General Bill Barr. Trump appointed him. He's a lifelong Republican. He supported Trump on pretty much everything. And he said, you know what? We looked into it. There's just nothing there. And Trump filed, 30-something lawsuits. And every single one of the judges said, show me what you got. And they did. And they go, nope, you got nothing. We're not even going to have a trial. Yeah. So that pretty much ended it for everybody except MAGA, hardcore MAGA people, and Trump, of course. But, in terms of the Russian collusion, it looks like they did not collude with Trump or his campaign, but they did muck up, they did get into our election system and tried to, stir shit up and just cause problems. They do that. We know they do that. And in this podcast I told you about with Mike Pence, he talked about this. He goes, I met Putin and I told him, Mr. President, we know what you did in 2016. Don't ever do that again. And he said, Putin said, I don't understand English. It's like, oh, okay. Translator. The election, Mr. President. Oh, no. We had nothing to do with that. It's like, yeah, okay. So that kind of stuff goes on, but not anything that tilts the election. Our system is reasonably trustworthy, I think.
What do you think of sort of this state we're in right now where, and I see it in journalism, I teach journalism, and the state of the media is that what I've sort of seen is this kind of like gradual lack of willingness to understand other people's perspectives, this ability to sit down and talk to somebody and say, oh, you believe this way on this political issue, or you believe this way on this, moral issue. Do you think we're going to turn the tide here, or are we just going to kind of always be now in this sort of case where if you criticize me, I'm going to try to cancel you, as opposed to you just say what you say and I can disagree with you?
Yeah, it's gotten more corrosive and polarized, mainly because of social media and the kind of real-time attacks that people can experience, whereas it was harder in the past before the internet to do that. There is an impulse in our psychology to tribalize, to be in a little silo with you and your fellow. thinkers that think alike. Everybody does that. And, and it takes some training or some kind of effort to put in. Like, I'm going to go talk to somebody that doesn't agree with me, just see what that's like. That's hard to do. Most people don't want to do it. Or try steel manning somebody's argument, as we call it. Not straw manning, where you set up an argument that they're not actually making and then you refute that. Actually state in your own words what you think the other person believes. Like, why is somebody pro-life in the abortion issue? Can you articulate their best arguments? And I've asked my students who are all pro-choice, can they do that? They can't. They don't actually know what the arguments are. It's like, well, then how good is your pro-choice position if you don't even know what the others? Half the country disagrees with you.
Right.
Do you know what their arguments are? No. Okay. Well, then your arguments are not very good. Your position is not very sound, right? So, but that takes training, and it doesn't come naturally. And we have a moralization impulse. We want justice. We want right instead of wrong, and we want to correct wrongdoing and so on. Everybody feels that way. So it's easy to then not just disagree with somebody, but to demonize them. That's a problem.
Right. One of the things that I've seen in Skeptic magazine, and I'll see if you could talk a little bit about, is, we legalized cannabis in California. It's this huge, industry, and it's still illegal in some states, and, federally it's not legal. Now we're seeing this like psychedelic mushroom sort of acceptance, this movement, where like people are, oh, well, mushrooms will open your brain and your mind and supernatural experience.
Right.
And, they're natural, and this is what Jesus used to do. These are what these people used to do a long time ago, and it's so close to the earth. And it's one of these things that feels like a lot of nonsense, but these people say,
I don't know.
What?
I've never personally done this,
Yeah.
and Rogan's been after me to, try ayahuasca, Shermer. It's a life changer, magic mushrooms. Okay. Yeah, maybe. I don't personally have experience with that. I don't use pot, although I ride my bike through Carpinteria and I get high now. It's like, oh, whoa, what's that smell? Oh, I know what that is. Remember from high school. But I think the research is pretty clear now that it does have some salubrious effects for like PTSD, for anxiety, just kind of general psychological issues that people have. The microdosing, that sort of thing seems to help. I see Aaron Rodgers was going on at some conference about altered states, about ayahuasca changes his life. Wow, Aaron Rodgers? Okay. I threw more touchdown passes when I took ayahuasca. Oh, really? Okay. So I don't know. I think probably there's something to that. It's unfortunate that, the discovery of these things in the 1950s, it wasn't long before they got abused and the government steps in to regulate it and criminalize it. And then that was the end of the research. We could have been way ahead had we started back then, real scientific research instead of just criminalizing it and then no one wanted to get involved. So I think there could be something to it, not opening the doors of perception to some other universe. I don't think that's true. I think it's all just up here. Yeah. But that's not trivial. Everything is up here, right? So if your emotions are negative, or you're having problems, it is up there where the problems are. So if that helps, then, why not?
I'm somebody, most of my life, I've not been logical in the sense of, I know the logical thing to do, but as a journalist, it's sort of an arts thing. You got to think about all these different perspectives. I enjoyed reading Skeptic because it helps me see, oh, well, yeah, it's really not that. It's a very simple explanation for why that is. And I'm just sort of wondering, you live your life here. Are you logical all the time? I mean, is there anything where you're like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to think this way. Or
I mean, when I'm playing with my kid or I'm riding my bike with my buddies, I'm just enjoying life or whatever. I'm not thinking about rationality and stuff like that. I guess things like love, emotions, those are slightly different than a pure reasoning process. Right. David Hume famously said, that reason is the slave to the passions or emotions, as we would call them today. What he meant was that reason is the best tools we have to figure out how to achieve your goals. But what the goal is that you want, that's going to be the product of your passions or your emotions. like, what career should I pick? Well, you can kind of reason your way to figuring that out. But, having a passion for a career, like, this is really what I want to do. I'm just so passionate. That you just have to kind of feel. Like, you just look around the landscape when you're a student and go, what is it I want to study or major? Or what kind of business do I want to open? That rationality is not going to get you there. It's going to be, what do I, or falling in love with somebody. You can't just make a list. I mean, people do make lists, pros and cons of this person or that person. But that's not really what's going to do it. It's going to be, that's the one. I just know it. I just have a feeling. And that's, I think, our emotions, our passions.
Yeah, that's a good answer, because you can't really be logical and everything. A couple more things before I let you go is I always have these debates with my son about free will. He's very much well, he's 17, so, he reads a lot, and, he's an atheist, and he has strong views on things. But he always tells me we don't have free will. He says, because everything you do because it has some benefit to you. Even if you're self-sacrificing, you are still doing something that you're going to get some enjoyment out of, and that human beings don't have free will. And he would explain it much greater than that. But I know you've written about this topic. I mean, do we have free will? What is your take?
The problem is how you define these terms. Yeah. So part of it is a linguistic issue. If the universe is causal and determined, which it is, we know from physics and the laws of nature, except for quantum effects, every effect has a cause. If you go all the way back, then the whole universe is determined from the Big Bang. It was determined 13.8 billion years ago that you and I would be sitting here today in front of this bookcase with the books in that particular order as I set them there, and so on, and not some other way. Okay. Well, part of the problem with that is that you and I are part of the causal net of the universe, and we're aware of the effects and interactions that we're having with the world. And so we can actually choose to go left instead of right, and that decision there will alter the future a little bit. And our participation in the causal net makes us not truly free in what's called libertarian free will, which doesn't exist. That's the assumption that there's somebody else, like a ghost machine, making the decisions for you. There's no little homunculus up there. There's no mini-me up there. Even if there were a little mini-me making the decisions freely, there would then be a mini-me inside mini-mini-me inside mini-me inside you making the decisions. So that doesn't get us there. What it is just that kind of a recognition of participating in the world, and that the choices you make, you're confronted with multiple things every moment. Should I go this way? Should I eat this or that? And that's not predictable. There's no computer that's going to calculate this. Now, there are these experiments in which these neuroscientists can put the EEG cap on and tell you before you know that you're going to push the left button rather than the right button, or you're going to choose the chicken rather than the steak, and so on. But when they say that, we saw it on the EEG reading before you were consciously aware of it. That's a little bit of a misdirection. The EEGs are reading the cortex. Sorry, I'm spacing out on the parts of the cortex that run your muscles, right? And so the decision is, you've already made the decision somewhere below that process. That signal goes up and says, okay, I'm going to move my arm and pick this one instead of that one. So the neuroscientist is reading this higher level, the lower level in which the decision is made by you. Even if it's unconscious, it's still you making the decision. So I know it's a naughty issue. No one's completely satisfied with this. Some of my best friends are determinists, and they have great arguments. Some of my best friends are compatibilists. They believe there is something like free will. They have good arguments. I'm not a professional philosopher, but I come down on the side of compatibilism. I do think we have some kind of volition. We make choices, and the choices are real, because you'll never know what the causes were, and no one will know. No computer could, kind of. This is why we don't have self-driving cars, by the way, yet. It's way, way harder of a problem, and none of the AI systems currently in use, I'm told, will ever be able to solve the problem of driving. Just simply driving. There's just the number of the degrees of freedom of things that could happen is so vast that no computer will ever solve that problem. It has to be okay. So how is it we apes can do it? reasonably well with, 50,000 or so a year dying. So we're not great at it, but we're, not horrible. And it's because we don't really understand how our brains work to then back engineer the brain and say, okay, I'm going to build a computer that can do what the brain does. That's why that hasn't happened yet. This is what my computer AI friends tell me.
Is intuition real?
Intuition's real in the sense it's a rapid cognition. That is, there's a lot of information processing that goes on subconsciously. And then what bubbles up is just kind of a feeling. It just takes raw emotions like hunger. Are you actually doing any kind of calculations about which kinds of foods and the calorie, value of an apple versus a banana or something? No, you're just like, I really have a craving today for this. Or I'm just hungry at this particular time. So this is just your body's way of getting you to do something without having to do all the background calculations. Like if you go play baseball and you run for a fly ball and the baseball's arcing in a particular way. You're not doing any calculations of calculus and, trajectories. And then I should move at this speed at that distance and put my arm out and catch the ball. It just happens by the fact that natural selection has designed our sensory apparatus and our motor cortex, that's it, to do all that without us having to be aware of it. Because if you were aware of all this stuff, you'd never even get out of bed. It's like, okay, now he's moving his left foot. Now he's moving his right foot. Oh, here he goes. You don't need that.
But that idea that, I have a bad feeling about driving down this street here.
Yes, you probably have a good reason for that, particularly those kinds of things. Threats. Human intuition about potential threats is usually pretty good. This is a book called The Gift of Fear. Like, listen to your fears, because you're probably picking up on something. You're not consciously aware of it, like something about this neighborhood. I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it, but just not vibing it. And women are especially good at this because women have to be more risk averse because they're smaller and weaker than men. They're more likely to be harmed physically than men, raped, sexually assaulted, murdered, and so on. It's just, or men with other men have to be very risk averse, like in prisons, things like that, gangs. So the intuition, the fear, the emotion of fear is really wired up by evolution to design us to, really pick up cues without doing the calculations. So that you don't even need to be aware of it. Just like, I'm just going to get out of this situation. I don't feel good about this.
So you should listen to your gut then sometimes.
Yes, right. Yeah. Not in Vegas when you're gambling. Our intuitions about probabilities are terrible. but other things, fear seems to be a good one. And love, right? I mean, sort of, not lust. That can trick, especially guys. I'm going to marry her. Hang on. Maybe date for at least another week.
Right. So I guess just as we wrap up, I find you really fascinating. Your work is amazing. For somebody like me who for so many years has wanted to believe in a lot of these things, right? Because it's so cool to think there's something else out there. I used to watch that show in the 80s or whatever it was called, In Search Of.
In Search of Leonard Nimoy, yes.
Used to narrate that.
I've seen every one of those episodes.
And I remember watching that as a kid. It's like, the Nazca lines. It's like,
yes.
The Nazca lines, they have to be real because you can only see that from above,
right.
Right.
And Easter Island statues, all that stuff. It's very romantic. It is.
It is. And so part of reading Skeptic is sort of learning to let go of some of these deeply held sort of feelings that you've had. And I think that's part of maturity is like, I can hold on to this, or I can say, there is kind of a logical explanation for it. And so I just kind of want to end with, why do you do what you do? Like, of all the things you could do, all things you could use your brain power for, why is it so important for you to be able to, share this information with people in our culture and society? Because, there's always going to, no matter what you say, there's always going to be people who are going to say, like, he's wrong, but you still do it,
Well, you should see my mailbox today. I was on Coast to Coast last night at midnight with George Norrie, talking UFOs and aliens and conspiracies, JFK, the whole thing. And most of the mail is pretty harsh.
Right.
Yeah, I post them on Twitter because they're kind of amusing, actually. I do it because I'm passionate about it. I'm interested in the subjects. I truly love reading about the latest JFK conspiracy theory or the latest alien UAP stuff. I would be, see people say, oh, you just don't want there to be aliens. No, I would be thrilled. If we actually made contact with another civilization, I would just be stunned and delighted and just like, oh my God, let's just go there. Let's contact with them and let's find out. Because it would be, again, I said they'd be ahead of us by a lot. How did they get through their version of the Cold War or global warming or whatever their problems we have? How did they solve those problems if they have a civilization? This would be great. I'm not afraid of any of that. Or if it turns out there's an afterlife, there's a God in an afterlife, and I wake up there, I'm like, oh my gosh. I would just say, oh, I was wrong. It happens. That's okay.
Right. So you do it out of curiosity.
Curiosity and passion, and there's a niche for it. The public wants to know, well, what do scientists think about this particular thing? And why don't they believe this when these other people seem to believe it passionately? How come most scientists are skeptical of UFOs, for example? Well, I'll tell you why. Here's why. Boom, boom, boom. Here's how science works. Here's the kind of evidence we need. And so on. And say, oh, I see.
You ever lose an argument?
No? Probably. Although if I knew it, then I wouldn't lose because I would change my mind. See, if I was really wrong. I don't want to be wrong. I want to just know it's true. I don't, I'm not really political or ideological too much. I just want to know what's true.
Right. Okay. Well, Michael Shermer, I really appreciate your time.
All right. Okay.
It's a great opportunity to see the headquarters of Skeptic
the
Magazine.
Nerve Center.
Yeah, and it's such a pleasure because I always saw you as this person who was not living, 5 miles away from me. So it's great. Well, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. All right.
Take care.